It's Friday and it's getting into nut cutting time. It's another Moss Football Friday. The whole crew here, TJ, Vegas, Mac, a crazy weekend again. We've got an edition number 2 of the college football playoff that has everybody's panties in a bunch. TJ, I hope your panties aren't in a bunch. How are you, buddy?
I can confirm that my panties are not in a bunch, and I can also confirm that Boise is still not a state.
There you go, Mac. Do you have a rebuttal to TJ's answer?
I have lots of panties and lots of bunches. Let me tell you, I'm not happy. I think this is bullshit.
That cut right there is going to forever be used on this show. So let's dive right into the topic at hand right now. And we'll get to the nuts and bolts. If you've been under a rock, you haven't seen the latest edition of the college football playoff rankings. I'm going to bang through them real fast. Oregon still 1, Ohio State 2, Texas moves all the way up to 3. Penn State somehow ahead of Indiana, the frauds that Penn State is. BYU, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, who is now the first team out. Boise, not a state. Debate it however you want to, and SMU. So, guys, initial reaction, Mac, I'll start with you. First snap reaction to what you saw on Tuesday night.
These guys are crazy. I don't know what they're trying to prove. It's a joke. It's an absolute friggin' joke. Why not? You know what? Here's the deal. My initial opinion is that they just want the teams that are going to bring them in the most money. They don't really care. They don't really want the teams that deserve to be there. I'm fired up about this. It's a joke. I'm TJ, take it because I'll go on forever.
Yeah. Max got to answer the call from Florida State. They're looking for people that whine well like that about rankings. So he's going to go take that phone call right now.
Man, I'll tell you.
Dude, I agree with Mac. He's got a legitimate point here. I mean, this thing is. So wasn't the whole idea to get to 12 teams so we didn't have really much to complain about as far as teams that get left out? And, oh, by the way, it's probably going to be a huge payday. And now look at this nonsense here. How is Indiana behind Penn State, first of all? How is BYU behind Penn State? And then you've got Alabama and Ole Miss and Georgia ahead of Boise State and SMU. Look, either you're going to have fidelity with this system, or you're going to have the same bull crap expanded to 12 teams. And so far, it's more of the latter and less of the former.
Yeah, and let's go back. That's exactly. But let's go back first before we go forward, because I think this will support where both of you guys are. Obviously, the biggest issue, if you will, the biggest movement out of last weekend, and the horrible irony in this, that the Georgia Bulldogs did not have the speed, if you know what I'm saying, to keep up with Ole Miss. And we've talked about Ole Miss and their defense and the Land Sharks, if you will. I know that was a couple of years ago, but this Ole Miss defense is as tough as it gets, and they showed it. And that's what really has started this kind of domino. We were wondering, was the SEC going to get 5 teams in the top 10? The committee spoke. They threw their, piece on the table, and they said, no, this is where you're going to be at. So what they did with Georgia, I don't have a particular issue with. Princely played great. I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to butcher his name. Ulysses Bentley was fantastic for the Rebels. They dominated every aspect of that game, but that's where I think a lot of this has come. And I'm going to throw this question out before we get to the other proponents here. The biggest question I have going into this weekend is, does a 3-loss SEC team get into this playoff? And with the way it's shaking itself out right now, I'm going to venture to say yes, they do. But here's the flip side of that scenario. BYU goes all the way to the Big 12 title game, and they lose to, let's say, Colorado. They have 1 loss. And you're going to put a 3-loss SEC team in over BYU? That I'm going to have a big-time problem with. I'm willing to let it play itself out. There's a lot of people crying about the SMU Miami thing. Listen, this was done on a projection, Mac, and I don't see the reason to get all up in arms about that yet. If you're going to give me Miami and SMU in the ACC title game, I'm going to venture to guess Miami's going to win that game. So I'm not up in arms in that regard, Mac, but I can see where some people are upset. But remember, this is only 2 of 6.
No, I agree. I know it's only 2 of 6, but I mean, right now Miami wouldn't even be in the championship game. That's part of it. Here's the thing. I want to start with Boise. You know, the committee said, and you, Mike, you said this a couple of times. A loss, especially a good loss, if you will, shouldn't hurt them. Remind me, how many losses does Boise have? One. Who did they lose to? The number 1 team in the country, and they didn't even. They probably should have won that game. You want to talk about a good loss? That's as good a loss as you could possibly have, and this is where you place them. And then you have the lurkers in Georgia. Yeah, they're not in it right now, but where do you put them? Right on the doorstep. I mean, the door's not even locked. In fact, it's open. It's right there. They're just gonna. If one of these teams loses, Indiana loses, Tennessee loses. Guess who just walked in? Not even the back door, the damn front door. It's Georgia. You know it.
Well, you know who's going to get screwed the most out of this whole thing is going to be Indiana. You know they're going to get the short end of the stick because once they lose, that's going to give the committee carte blanche to move as many teams in front of them. 2-loss SEC teams will go right in front of Indiana.
Yeah,
just go ahead and have your big conference. Have put everybody in. Make it an open tournament. Say Alabama, Georgia, all the big names. Put them in there. Have your tournament, and then say, you know what? Now we're going to have a tournament with all the other teams that deserve to be there. I mean, I get it. Army doesn't deserve to probably be in there, but they don't deserve to be 24th either.
I'm more interested to see what happens based on this, and the committee has kind of shown us now eye test and what you can be is just as important as eye test and what you actually did. Hence the exact reason that Penn State is ranked ahead of Indiana. Now, obviously, Indiana goes down and beats Ohio State, and that takes care of the problem, if you will, there. But I have I think it's more egregious if we get to the point where we're looking at a team like BYU that can go all the way to the end, and I believe they will. They could go all the way to the end, and they could lose to a red-hot Colorado team, and the Big 12 is only going to get one team in. Because here's the thing. What if Georgia beats Tennessee? How high do the dogs go at that point? Especially if you look at this week's ranking, and I think
probably fourth.
Next week's going to be incredible because look what the committee set themselves up for. If Georgia were to beat Tennessee, Tennessee's not out of it by any stretch of the imagination there. But then you look at what they did right behind at 10 and 11, or right in front of Georgia, if you will, at 10 and 11, you have Alabama, who beat the hell out of Georgia. Yes, Georgia came back. Alabama dominated the game. And Ole Miss, who just beat the living crap out of Georgia, ranked right ahead of Georgia. So if Georgia were to beat Tennessee, you've set yourselves up to go, well, we can flip-flop Georgia all the way in front of both of those teams. That's where I think next Tuesday night gets insanely ridiculous because they've set themselves up for that exact scenario. Personally, and we're going to get to this game. Personally, I think they got their hands full with Tennessee. Granted, Nico Iamaleava's status is a big cloud hanging over that game, but that's the part I don't get. You're telling me those two teams that beat the hell out of Georgia are right in front of Georgia. So what happens if Georgia beats Tennessee? You're going to leapfrog Ole Miss and Bama? You can't, to me.
And here's the other thing I don't like. I don't like these teams that win the conference getting a higher seed because they won the conference. I think that's crap. I really do. I mean, granted, they can get in. Let them in. That's fine. They get the automatic, if you will, berth in. But they don't need to get a higher seed. I mean, there's no way that I think that's fair. I mean, you got, Miami's really ninth, but they're going to be fourth. They don't deserve to get that ranking. If you're going to rank them, rank them. You're 12th, you're 12th. You're ninth, you're ninth. You're fourth, you're fourth. That's all there is to it. Playing with all these numbers, it's just hokey to me. It's like, why should they get a higher seed because they won the conference? I don't see. I mean, we don't see it in basketball. You don't see, Duke won the ACC. Now they're an automatic number one seed. I mean, it sometimes works that way, but it's not because they're a conference champion. I can't believe I said Duke. I meant UConn. That's what I meant.
Because Duke is Duke, and they're on more than Leave It to Beaver.
I think they lost. Did they lose? Yeah, they lost.
Yeah. TJ, I'm going to throw this one out for you. Here's a wild scenario, and Peter Burns from ESPN threw this out today. And if you really think about this could throw the whole thing up in arms. If every SEC favorite wins for the next 3 weeks, and Arkansas, Mac's like 17th favorite team, beats Missouri, then LSU will go to the SEC title game. LSU against the winner of Texas against Texas A&M. So I think, TJ, there's something to say for what Mac just said. Like, should you get the advantage if you win your conference of getting a higher seed? Well, when we have these 16, 18, 20 team mega conferences and half the teams don't play each other, that's something that probably needs to be addressed going into next year.
Well, I think the second point that you made is the one that's most important. If these teams aren't playing each other, not playing everybody in their conference, then it's not a true representation of where they are. You know, if Oregon is going to play Washington and SC and UCLA and Ohio State and Indiana, but they're not going to play, say, Penn State, you know, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. I think you put the nail right on the head there, and that does need to be addressed. It would be pretty easy. It would be pretty easy to fix if they went back to divisions, because then you can play everybody in your division, and then you can play the best team in the opposite division in the championship game.
Yeah, and one of the things I do see, and maybe we didn't see it as much in the past years, or maybe we saw it, but we didn't pay as much attention to it now that there's 12 teams instead of 4. I'm going to give you a perfect example right now. Rocket Sanders and South Carolina had a freaking another day last weekend. The Cocks are hot right now, and that's a team that can really screw up a lot of shit in this thing. The SEC, go figure, here we are again talking about the SEC and their place in the college football playoff, Mac. The SEC can screw up this entire thing, and it looks like they kind of already are.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I know there's so many questions still, and there's so much football to be played. I said a lot of head scratching, because that's what this really comes down to. There's so many different scenarios that can happen. I mean, you talked about that one. I mean, we talked the last couple of weeks about the ACC. I think the ACC could throw this thing for a loop. I mean, like I said, what if Miami doesn't get? What if it's SMU? What if SMU runs the table and they beat Clemson? Now you got SMU, who's 14th. They're going to jump somewhere. I mean, they're going to jump all the way into one of the top 4. I mean, it's just I'm really scratching my head. I liked it in week 1. I'm confused. I'm going to be honest. I'm confused in week 2.
You wait till week 3 if you're. They're taking us through the roll. This is exactly what they wanted, though, Teach. This is exactly what they wanted with this, and they're getting it. How it shakes out, here we go.
No, 100%. That's what they're getting.
And here's the other thing. What if ASU ends up winning a couple more games? What if ASU wins this week and then they go and beat BYU? What if ASU ends up playing and gets into this? I mean, they're not even into 25.
Yeah, that's still a head scratcher, and we've talked a lot about this Arizona State team on this show. Sam Leavitt playing fantastic. They get a big win last week without Cam Scattaboo, and now they get to go into Manhattan this week in one of the games that we'll talk about here in a little bit. The driver's seat and the door has been swung wide open for Colorado. They went out. They're going to the Big 12 title game. If you had BYU and Colorado in the Big 12 title game at the beginning of the year, I'm going to call you a liar to your damn face because you're full of shit. BYU still getting no respect. And if we talk about how you play in a win or even how you play in a loss, which a lot of people are assuming here in a couple of weeks, how you play in a loss is going to dictate what happens to Indiana, because we're just assuming that Ohio State's going to beat Indiana because Indiana doesn't belong here. Well, Washington didn't belong there last year either and played their way all the way to the championship game. And TJ, when we look at it, you mentioned it last week when we were talking about the Heisman video, or not this past Thursday, the week before that. We needed to see Ashton Genty have a big game. He did exactly that. Boise State's place and where they can finish. And that's the part I have a problem with is the how low Boise State is in this. The SMU thing, it's no shade on the Mustangs. Rhett Lashley's doing a great job there. They're a fun team to watch. They very well could win the ACC. But Boise has the best loss of all the teams in this that you mentioned earlier, Mac. TJ, the best loss is Boise State's, but we're still looking at Boise State getting in because they're going to win the Mountain and they're going to be that highest non-power conference champion. But It's like I'm having a hard time with the bottom side of this logic. I don't necessarily have a problem with the top side of the logic other than Penn State. I've stated my case on Penn State. I think they're a fraud. I'm going to continue to say it until the cream rises to the top.
No, you're 100% right. What's happening here, and just the optics of it are just horrible. With Boise being at 13, you got 3 SEC teams right above them, and then what's going to happen? What happens, Mike, if this somehow stays like this, and then all of a sudden, it's the last day, and I guess Boise State jumps up to 12 now, and now so now the SEC is going to be up in arms. This whole bottom 6, 7, 8, 9 here is just kind of a mess right now. And, I'm hoping that it sorts itself out. And then on the other hand, I'm hoping this turns into just a giant gong show for people to figure out, because it's a disservice to some of these teams.
There's another team that we haven't talked about, and I want to bring them up because they've had a pretty good year. That's Washington State.
They are the fly in the ointment.
Pac-2.
I'm just saying, they've played pretty well. They're sitting there at 18, but, couple more wins, couple more teams lose, except for Georgia. They're going to lose 2 or 3 more times and still be in. But, it's just another, again, like you said, Mike, we're talking about these teams. Did you think we'd be talking about Washington State? Did you think we'd be talking about, SMU? You think we'd be talking about Army? No, but we are. So, congratulations, I guess, maybe I'll go put my panties away and maybe they're doing the right thing.
Mac just giving us more and more for the content crew and the social team this week. All right, let's look at what we do know right now based on what we have. So we've got a potential Boise State versus Ohio State winner will get Miami. Notre Dame and Tennessee winner gets Oregon. Ole Miss, Penn State winner gets BYU. Bama, Indiana winner gets Texas. When I look at these top to bottom, if everybody remembers the Peach Bowl from a year ago, Ole Miss and Penn State, good football game right there. And I remember watching that game, Mac, and I sent you a text, and I'm like, this Ole Miss team is going to be really, really, really dangerous next year. And that was assuming they had Quinshon Judkins too before he bolted to Ohio State. But it was because of the defense and the comfortability with Jackson Dart, who's had an incredible year. I really like the spot that Ole Miss is in. I think Ole Miss is going to play their way higher. Maybe Lane Kiffin can get to that 8 line and get the night home game that he complained about a couple weeks ago, because in the scheduling genius of the SEC, Ole Miss hasn't played a night game at home this year. And that's something that it goes a long way for everything. We saw just this week, Ole Miss flipped the top recruit from Alabama. Like, this Ole Miss team is good. And Florida is going to continue to kick themselves for not getting Lane Kiffin over to Gainesville when they had the opportunity to. But what's the one matchup that we know of, Mac? And I'll go to you first and then TJ. Out of these potential matchups, as we are in addition to of the 6 of these, what's the one that stands out to you?
I think the one that stands out to me would be Indiana and Alabama. This is the one like I would really want to see. I mean, Alabama's struggled this year. We know that. They've had their moments, but, this is where Indiana's going to, put their stake in the ground and say, listen, we deserve to be here. If they, again, assuming maybe they lose to Ohio State, which we think, they might. If they deserve to be here, this is the game that's going to matter. They're going to have to beat somebody good. There's no better name than to beat Alabama.
Deej, is there one that jumps off the page to you?
Well, other than the Boise State Ohio State matchup, I think that's the one for me, just because it would be great to see. Remember in 2007 when Boise State plays Oklahoma, right? And it's the big okay, can this team from a mid-major hang with one of the team that just won the national title 3 seasons before? And not only did they hang with them, they beat them. So I think this would be a great matchup. This would be a great test. And I'm not the biggest Boise fan, but I'd probably be rocking for the blue and orange that day just to shove it into Ohio State's face.
Well, and I think the other thing that is an interesting dynamic as you look at how at least this edition lays itself out. You've got Bama, which would be in Bloomington. in the middle of January. You've got Ole Miss that would be in a happy valley in or late December. You've got these teams that are not snow teams that are going to play snow games in this first edition. That's one of the cool things that we see about the home field advantage in that first round there. Bama playing at Bloomington, it's going to be 20 something degrees if we're lucky, freezing effing cold. That's a cool dynamic of this. But I think what we're going to see in next week's rankings before we move off of this and look at some of these games, guys, I'll go to you, Mac. I think the coolest thing for me is the committee has kind of done what Georgia's done to themselves now. The committee has backed themselves into a corner with that 10, 11, 12 is where I'm looking at the most in those three SEC teams. If Georgia was to beat Tennessee, I don't think falls out of the top 14. I don't think you can justify doing that to Tennessee, but they've set themselves and painted themselves into a corner.
Yeah, these next couple of weeks are going to be very, very interesting. Again, that's our big game this week, and we'll get to that one. What's going to be interesting to me is if we have it's going to be one big upset. Is all it's going to be. One big upset is really going to make a difference in how this all shakes out. And it's just, where's that upset going to come from? Who's going to run the table? Is A&M going to continue to win? Are they going to become the factor? Is what's going to happen with Clemson? It is going to be interesting.
Yeah, geez, I'll give you the final word on this, and before we start previewing some of these games, what's jumping out that you're looking for this weekend?
I'm looking for I don't know. I'm looking for some teams to separate themselves, and then I'm looking for the committee to crap themselves all at the same time. And if I can see that, that's going to be great value for my money. I would like to see this. I would like to see this log jam at 10, 11, and 12 be solved. I don't think it will, but I'd like to see it be solved because one or two of these teams is probably going to miss out, and we need to see who it's going to be.
Yeah, and I again, and we'll jump in and we'll start in the ACC, which I think has a little bit to say in this matter here. But I think that's the biggest thing is if we're going to continue on this model for however long the contract is before we look at expanding it again, we have got to get these mega conferences into split divisions where we're going to see a lot of these top teams play and redo the damn divisions. I mean, the SEC West and the SEC East have not been on the same playing field for quite a while now. And I think that ultimately settles it because if you try and read these conference tie-breaking scenarios in all these mega conferences, I mean, you don't have enough hours in your lifetime to figure out, how we get to like tiebreaker 9, which is a coin flip. Let's start in one of those conferences that's a little mucky at the top. And number 20, Clemson, is at Pitt this weekend. Clemson right now, based on how the standings work in the ACC, would be in the title game ahead of Miami. There's a lot of football left, a lot of things that can impact that. Cade Klubnik for Clemson has played really, really well. We talked about this last week. We left Clemson for dead after they got manhandled at the beginning of the season, and they've just rattled off win after win after win. Pitt, who made it undefeated for quite a while and wouldn't have if Cal's kicker could have freaking hit water if you pushed him off of Cuba. But here we are in this situation. We've got Clemson, we've got Pitt, and that's a tough little road game for a hot Clemson team that really has to keep playing good football. This is a tricky spot for the Tigers here, and I'm kind of interested finally to watch Pitt play for the first time this year, Matt.
Well, it is tricky, and Pitt's lost their last 2 games. They didn't show up against SMU at all. They got their doors actually blown in, and then back that up by really not showing up against a Virginia team either. Again, Pitt, I was all on that train. They played very, very well, had some great wins at the beginning of the season, but they haven't played well the last couple of weeks. Clemson is kind of going, we said, in the opposite direction. I'm going to be quite honest with you. It hurts me to say this, but I'll lay the 10 points in this game. I think Clemson's playing a whole lot better. Eli Holstein hasn't really done a whole lot with this Pitt offense the last couple of weeks. It's been mostly the defense that's really done a lot for them. I think Clemson rolls in this game. Clemson knows if they win this game, for the most part, they're going to be in the ACC championship and have a chance to get into the playoffs. I'll give the 10. I'd even give more than it. I think they're going to blow Pitt's doors out.
I've only got that one exciting game against SMU to reflect on, and that thing was a big pile of horse bleep. They couldn't get anything going. It was terrible. I wanted to take back my pick 30 seconds into the game. They're not impressed me. They did not impress me that day. And when you have two quarterbacks, what do they say? You have no quarterbacks. I like Clemson in this spot as well. I think Mac's bang on. I think they blow Pittsburgh right out of their own stadium.
I'm going to play a little recency bias here, and we've seen this before from Clemson, and I'm not really a huge fan of this Pitt team. They don't do a whole lot to wow me. Clemson's on such a roll right now, and they've looked so good, and they know that they have everything in front of them, and this game screams classic oh shit moment for me. I'm going to take Pitt, and I'm going to take them at home in this game. I'm going to take them on the money line. With what we've seen over the last couple of weeks and the chaos that's been going on, this to me screams the classic spot where Dabo doesn't get the job done just when we're starting to give Clemson the credit that they've been missing. Because again, everybody, and rightfully so, they looked horrible in week one. We left them sitting there dead. We're moving on with life. They're on a good roll here. It screams to me classic time for Clemson to choke.
I would agree with you if they hadn't lost just a couple weeks ago. I think that loss kind of gets this team focused. If they had still only had that one loss coming into this game, I would 100% agree with you. But you know what? They got backed up just a little bit a couple weeks ago in their loss. And I think that sometimes it's exactly like you said. That's what this team needs. Say, hey, listen, if we're going to make the playoffs, we've got to win this game. I just think Clemson's too strong for this Pitt team.
So we don't have a universal across the board there. Let's go to another game that's falling slightly under the radar, but still does have an impact in what happens here in the Big 12 race, and that's red-hot Arizona State and their defense that's been balling out all year against Kansas State in Manhattan. Kansas State, Arizona State, both can kind of maneuver their way up. They need a little bit of help from the top side of the conference. Iowa State having lost a couple of games in a row here. This is a big-time game in Manhattan, and this Arizona State team is playing with nothing but house money, and the confidence and the buzz behind them. Avery Johnson's played great. TJ, you've talked about him a few times this year for Kansas State. I'll start with you. Arizona State in the spot. I like the Devils here to make it a game. I don't know yet how I'm going to play it, but I really like this spot, and I think this is going to be one of the games that kind of falls under the radar this weekend.
Oh, for sure. I mean, right now I'm showing Arizona State getting 9 in this matchup. I watched K-State against Colorado, and then I watched K-State against BYU. I think a lot of us watched that. And I thought that Colorado game, I thought that Johnson, he showed a lot of moxie there in that late drive, and there was just a beautiful play to win the game against Colorado in a game that they really had no business winning after they blew the lead. Meanwhile, you know how I feel about Arizona State. I think that they're playing just fantastic football right now. Whatever Coach Dillingham is doing, I love it. Give me all of it in my veins right now. But this is a tough matchup, and ASU has a looming matchup against BYU the next week. So that
game, I'm glad you brought that up. Sorry, TJ. I'm glad you brought that game up specifically before you finish here. That game's got some college game day kind of implications to it, too. If BYU comes in, Arizona State comes off of a win in Manhattan, if they can get the job done. And I think the players and the coaching staff, TJ, at ASU, they know what's on the horizon. But this is a team that will not look past their current objective, which is Kansas State.
No, and I hope that they don't. I see it out there, and this has this K-State game has a classic trap component to it. But I'm with you. I think ASU gives them a game. I'm leaning toward taking the points in this game, just as kind of a safety net here. I'm not sold at this point if they're going to pull off the victory, but I do think they keep it close.
ASU scares me on the road just a little bit. They've gotten a little bit better, but they're not a great road team. They seem like they just get off to a really, really slow start. The good news, Mike, your boy looks like he's going to be playing. Cam looks like he's ready to go. So that definitely helps. But here's the thing, they went last week and won without him, which is a good sign. Whenever you can take really one of your best offensive pieces and go out and dominate a game like they did, that's a really, really good sign. And so I'm going to agree with you guys. I love ASU in this game. I don't think they're going to look ahead to BYU because they know, listen, if they don't win this game, that BYU game doesn't mean as much. Yes, they're going to say, okay, we could knock them out of the championship game maybe. But here's the thing. They're looking at themselves and saying, we got a chance to get into this thing. And the only way they can do that is they got to take care of business. They've got a really tough schedule. You got K-State, you got BYU, and then the Kitty Cats, after that. And so that's three really, really big games for ASU. There's no reason for them to look ahead at all. I'm looking ahead to that game with the Kitty Cats because we're going to be there. But other than that, they got to be focused one play, one snap at a time.
Yeah, and
a lot of.
We can look ahead, Teach. I mean, here you go, and I know you're going to love this. You're absolutely going to love this. So when you look ahead to next week's schedule, obviously the big one next week is Ohio State and Indiana. But Game Day has kind of said their thing this year about how they want to get to some new spots. They want to do some new things. So let's just take a gander at next week's schedule. Ole Miss is going to beat the living shit out of Florida. You got Penn State playing Minnesota. That's the kind of game I could see Penn State losing. Texas A&M's at Auburn. Go through a little bit more of this. Vandy and LSU, but you're not going to go back there. Wake Forest and Miami, who cares? SMU and Virginia, who gives a shit? Oh, and nope, here's the game. Georgia is taking their scheduling to the highest point next week when they host UMass. Tennessee plays UTEP. You got Colorado and Kansas, the Citadel and Clemson. I mean, maybe that's why I think Dabo is going to lose this week to Pitt because they're looking ahead to the Citadel. The fuck out of here with this shit. And then you got Army and Notre Dame. I really think that there is a solid chance that Game Day could be coming to Tempe next week for that game, especially if the Devils go into Manhattan and they pull off that upset. And I'm gonna call it right here. Maybe this is my insight to my best bet. Pitt on the money line, Arizona State on the money line. I believe that team is playing with the description and definition of house money right now, and I'm gonna jump on the dilly wagon there for Arizona State.
2 double Del beefs for the win.
Hey, Mike, don't forget Bob's Big Bowl this week. You missed one. You missed one for this week. Alabama is playing Mercer. Remember, Mercer's already clinched a spot in the playoffs, so they're ready to go. So I'm just saying, Bob's Big Bowl. Watch out for the Mercer Bears.
I believe the line of the week was by TJ in Head of the Class on Tuesday. The conference mandated cupcake game.
Yep, every November. Every November.
So, let's talk about the big one at hand, guys. Obviously, Tennessee, Georgia. You've got Fowler and Herbie on the call. This is a 4:30 left coast time game on ABC. And the biggest question for me, obviously, it sounds like based on Josh Heupel's comments from earlier in the week, Nico Iamaleava is going to be a go. Whether that's gamesmanship or not, who knows? Georgia, they know what they got to do. They saw their ranking, and this is where Georgia's really backed themselves into a corner because we were just talking about the scenarios of possibly College game day going to Arizona State 2 years ago. You would have said, yeah, right. But when you look at this and you look at their schedule going forward, after this week, Tennessee doesn't really get to help them, or Georgia doesn't get to help themselves a whole lot because they have that really tough game against UMass, and then they finish with Georgia Tech. Obviously, Georgia Tech is better than they have been in a long time, but for Georgia, this is it. For Tennessee, this is it too, because on the flip side of this, Mac, for Tennessee, if you can go to your recruits and you've already got some of the top 10 classes and you go, we beat Alabama, we beat Georgia, or, I mean, think of where Tennessee is going to move in a week in this college football playoff. If they've got a bag on Georgia and they've got a bag on Alabama, this is a big, big time game. And I hope Nico Iamaleava is as close to 100% as possible, because I really like the Vols in this spot.
I mean, yeah, you would have to think Georgia's, their back's against the wall, at least we think. Or, their back's against the front door that's wide open, whatever it is, with that. You would think that they know they have to win this game. Or maybe we're looking at it wrong. Maybe they think, maybe if we lose this game, maybe we'll move up. Maybe that's their thinking. But all kidding aside, my feeling is this is a time where Georgia, they're just not going to make a mistake. And we've seen them this year. They've kind of, in big games, they've looked really good. They've looked really bad. They've looked really good. They've looked really bad. Again, it's kind of like how I feel about Alabama. I don't feel real good about this team. I don't feel good about this Georgia team. I wouldn't put my money or your money on this team. I can't. There's too many questions about them. And Tennessee has played really, really good. They've gotten better. They started off the season good, a little bit of a slump. They seem like they fit, kind of come together a little bit more. I don't trust Georgia. I don't trust Georgia. Rocky Top all the way in this one.
Adding Georgia to the no trust list. Right behind
Are you done?
Steelers and the Broncos.
Vegas Mac has been added to the do not enter Athens list.
Look, I'm going to keep a couple things in my back pocket here, but would you care to guess how many times Tennessee has given up 20-plus points this season?
None.
That would be none.
Close your eyes and tell me what you see.
That would be a big fat donut, yes. This Georgia team is probably going to be the best, potentially the best offense that they've seen. So I'm looking forward to watching this defense play. And I know I thought that against Oklahoma, and Oklahoma was meh, just because Oklahoma was the best team they played at the time. And then I thought that against Alabama, and they really, for the most part, shut them down. So now you've got another test with Georgia, who can have a prolific offense if everything goes right. I'm really excited to see this defense play against them.
Yeah, this line's going to come down by the time we hit kickoff tomorrow, but we're looking at a 10-point spread here. I don't know. For most of the week it's been there. Maybe that had something to do with Nico's status. Here's what I want to see, because I watched this in the Bama game, and it was really frustrating to sit there. Like, I almost thought I was a Tennessee fan watching the game. It was really frustrating to sit there and see that game. For anybody that watched that game start to finish, like I did, Tennessee should have blown Alabama out. They were all the way down on their first drive. Dylan Sampson, reliable as all hell. He fumbles the football. What I want to see out of Tennessee here, especially if Nico isn't quite 100%. So I want to see Tennessee dial up some deep balls real quick and real early, because if they can get Georgia's defense back on their heels right out of the onset, and Dylan Sampson, a guy who probably doesn't show up in your top 10 on any of your Heisman lists, but the year that Dylan Sampson has had for them this year has been absolutely incredible for the Dogs. And that's one of those things that I need to see early. The other thing, Mac, and TJ's trying to reconnect here. The other thing is, what did Tennessee learn from the blueprint that was laid out from Ole Miss last week? That's the big thing. Ole Miss was able to get to Carson Beck 5 times. They put him on the ground. Umami Ellen and then her defensive line. They were all over the place. Did they pick anything up from that? And this is the biggest game. Let's be honest. This is the biggest game in the Kirby Smart era that we've had the entire time since he's got there. This is make or break for Georgia. This doesn't mean they're not going to be a blue blood and a big dog. Pun intended. A big dog in the college football landscape. No, but for this year in the first college football playoff that they were expected to dominate and take no problem, this is the biggest game Kirby Smart's had as a Georgia head coach.
Yeah, and I feel as though Tennessee is built a lot like Ole Miss. I really think, I'm not going to say they're carbon copies of each other, but they're pretty darn close, especially offensively. And like TJ said, they may not be as good as Ole Miss on defense, but they obviously, they've done a pretty good job so far this year. So going to be very, very interested in this game. Again, I just don't have the trust in Georgia. The two big teams, Alabama and Georgia, I have no trust in them at all to win a big game this year.
I've got the Vols on the road on the money line. Max going with the Vols. TJ, are we going the same color across the board? That'll be on Saturday night, TJ, after dark. Guys, let's move over to the National Football League. Let's take a look at the AFC playoff picture as we get into week 11 here, and we've got some interesting stuff. Obviously, the big game on the table in the NFL, we all know what it is. It's the Chiefs and the Bills. But right now, as we sit 9-0, Kansas City at 1, Buffalo at number 2, Pittsburgh at number 3, Houston 4, Baltimore 5, the LA Chargers at 6, and the Denver Broncos at 7. We're going to bypass everybody else because Indy's in the 8th spot. Cincinnati's in the 9th spot. Indy would have the tiebreaker over Cincinnati. Indianapolis, who made news this week, they're going back to Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco, a lot of turnovers in the 2 games. Sounds like it was more of a punishment. But when we look at this layout, and I caught a really interesting thing as we were getting ready for the show today, guys. You look at these teams that are in the mix, because if you go down past Cincy, you're getting into Miami, you're getting into the Jets. We're not going to waste any time there. There's little to none on the chance meter there. Week 14 is an interesting week in the AFC playoff picture because 4 of these teams in this mix are all on byes in week 14, which is an advantage for a lot of them. This game, Kansas City and Buffalo, we know, obviously, Kansas City with a loss would still have a 1-game advantage, but Buffalo holds the tiebreaker in their back pocket. Most amazing thing I saw, TJ, and I'll start with you here. You can go on a certain bookmaker right now, and you can take a bet on the Steelers right now to be the number 1 seed in the AFC at 28-1 odds. And you go, the Steelers aren't going to be the number 1 seed in the AFC. Do we know that? Because they're only 2 games from the top, and they still have to play their whole division.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and look, I've been one of those guys I'm like the anti-Chiefs guy here. But is there not a point where all of this magical bullcrap ends? Like, you block a field goal to win a game against the Broncos. You have phantom false start calls that aren't made on a game-winning drive. Come on. The law of averages says this has to end for the Chiefs eventually.
Swift magic.
Meanwhile, the Steelers arguably have the best defense of any of these teams. And look, I'm the first one to say that I was not expecting any of this from the Steelers. I thought that their defense would lead them to a 7-10 record because the offense couldn't get out of their own way. And oh my gosh, Russell Wilson has just seemed to find the fountain of youth in the Allegheny River, which I do not understand whatsoever. But look, I would take that 28-1 though. That's a solid play right now.
They're in a great spot.
But they haven't played in a division. When they play in the division, they're going to get at least 2 or 3 losses. They're going to split probably with the Ravens. They're probably going to split with Cincinnati. So that's going to give them, there's 4 losses right there, probably even split with Cleveland. So they're going to finish with 4 or 5 losses without a doubt. That's just how that division is.
Yeah, here's another interesting part of this. So when I talked about all the teams in the AFC playoff picture, the 4 of them that are off in week 14, that's a huge advantage. Buffalo, they get a bye after they play Kansas City before they host San Francisco. Here's another flip. When you go to week 16 and week 17 in their schedules, on the Saturday of week 16, you've got Kansas City and Houston, and then you've got Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Then 4 days later, you've got Pittsburgh and Kansas City on Christmas, and you've got Houston and Baltimore on Christmas. So the way this has worked out, talk about pulling every possible right string in the world. Yes, Pittsburgh definitely has the hardest schedule here. They've got their entire division left. And then when you get outside the division, what do we mix in? At Philadelphia, and on Christmas Day against Kansas City. I mean, Pittsburgh's they're up against it. We knew this going into the season that Pittsburgh had this run. When you look at the bottom side of it, you've got the Chargers and Denver holding those last two spots right now. I think we're really buckled up on the AFC side for some compelling football. And there's a lot of interesting quirks. There's for Kansas City guys, Friday game, Sunday night football, Saturday game, 4 days rest, Christmas. There is a lot of quirks to this late season schedule when you break down this AFC playoff picture, Mac.
Yeah, and I mean, I still think when we start with the North, I still think Baltimore's going to end up winning that division. You know, it pains me to say that, but I really do. The schedule is just too tough for Pittsburgh down, like I said, down the stretch. And then Cincinnati, I mean, yeah, they have yet to play it down on defense, but still, in order to beat them, you still got to put up points. You know, it's a tough matchup for anybody because, you know, they're going to put up a lot of points. And obviously, they're going to give up a lot of points, but, you know, those are tough matchups, you know, and then, you know, sprinkling the Brownies there every once in a while. They can be tough when they want to be, but, you know, maybe not so much this year. But it's going to be very, very interesting. Kansas City, I mean, it's like every week you go, you know, this is the game they're going to lose. I can see it. They're just not playing well. And like you said, TJ, it's a field goal. It's a call. It's a flip of the coin. You hate to bet against them. You really do. But I mean, truth be told, we know only one team's gone undefeated. So you know a loss is coming. But can you pick the right week?
You're calling the Chiefs to go undefeated?
No, I said
breaking news from the Mike Arana show?
No. I said we only know one team has gone undefeated. So you know the loss is coming. You know, it's just, you know.
No, you're totally right. It is, can you pick the right week? And every week it seems like, well, I honestly, I didn't think the Broncos had a chance. And then as you're watching the game, it's like, holy smokes, this defense is keeping them in the game. They do have a chance. But you know me, I have that. When you play for field goals, bad things happen, and that sure as hell happened to Denver this past weekend. I'm very impressed with the Steelers right now. I think the bottom of this bracket right now is just the dregs. Literally, I mean, like these teams are going to get the honor of going into their playoff game and just getting blitzed. You might as well put the Colts in there. And I don't know why they're not playing Flacco, because do they want to make the playoffs or do they not want to make the playoffs? That's what you got to ask yourself. I think
there'll be a lot of games for Richardson to play. You'll be way too tired.
Oh yeah, exactly. I've got my eye on the Bengals right now. I think that they might be able to sneak in there.
I do think the Bengals could catch lightning in a bottle. They've got, you know, one of the games that's really under the radar this week, especially when you're talking about the AFC playoff picture, is you've got the Bengals and you've got the Chargers on Sunday Night Football. It's a game that's not getting a whole lot of talk and a whole lot of love. But when you go forward with Cincinnati's schedule, they've got a bye week after they play the Chargers. They still have games against Tennessee and Dallas. They play Dallas at Dallas on a Monday Night Football game. That's going to should be an easy game for the Bengals there. So they're in a good spot. Here's the interesting thing about Indy, and we can make the jokes and whatever. Indy's been in 9-1 score games this season. Like, Indy's been right there in a lot of their games. And if they would have been able to convert one or two of them at this point, they're going to put a little more pressure on Houston. Houston's still got a 2-game advantage on them, and Houston does have some games left in the division that'll help them, but they also have that Saturday to Christmas stretch where they've got at Kansas City and versus Baltimore. So I think the AFC playoff picture is really, really compelling right now as we sit today at this very moment. In the first round, you'd have Denver at Buffalo, you'd have the Chargers at the Steelers, and you'd have Baltimore playing Houston in Houston's typical playoff spot, which is the first game on Saturday. That's the Houston wildcard spot right there. Kind of funny how that works out. But Houston's got to make up some ground because you're chasing Pittsburgh, you're chasing Buffalo, and they're going to have the opportunity to do that. Baltimore, one game ahead of them technically record-wise, but Baltimore would fall behind because of not winning the North as we sit right now. Mm-hmm. We've got some interesting stuff here. And before we get into the two biggest games in the AFC for the weekend, let's go cross-conference. 205 Kickoff for me out in Arizona, 105 for the left coasters. You've got the Atlanta Falcons coming off of a horrible loss in Denver to play those Broncos that we were just talking about. The Broncos at 2.5, about 2-point favorite, over under hovering right around the 44 mark. Kevin Kugler and Daryl Johnson on the call for Fox in this one. I think this is going to be a lot better game than a lot of people realize. And that Falcons team, like offensively, they're really starting to do stuff. And one thing that I don't think anybody talked about with the Falcons going into the season, obviously the Kirk Cousins story was the big story. One of the other guys they brought in who's been a game changer for them is Mooney as a wide receiver. The last 3 weeks, he's had 85 yards or more receiving. He can stretch the field. Kyle Pitts has become consistent. That 50-yard receiving mark for him has been really good. That being said, both of these teams come in off close losses, where Atlanta was 5 for 14 on third down last week in a bad loss to the Saints matchup. I can't wait to watch in this one. Mac, you've got Pat Surtain and Drake London. That's going to be fantastic football to watch with those two there. But this is a game that both of these teams need. Denver a little bit more than Atlanta. Atlanta's got a little bit of a cushion, but don't open the door for the Buccaneers if you're Atlanta, because they can catch you. Mac?
Yeah, I'm really kind of disappointed in Atlanta. I really am. I thought they were going to be a little bit better. It seems like every time I really started kind of paying attention to them, they like last week against the Saints, they just drop a stink bomb in there. They're just a little too inconsistent for me. I like the Broncos. I finally got to watch them for a good period of the time the last couple of weeks. Again, Bo Nix seems like he is getting better. I mean, you know, Peyton kind of draws things up, and to make it successful for him, this is a type of game where I really think Denver is going to be able to win this game. I don't like the way Atlanta's playing. They're just too inconsistent for me. I don't think Denver's played bad. I think that if you look through the year, they've been pretty consistent throughout the year. I mean, again, you're a play away from beating Kansas City. You can't say much more than that. I really like Denver in this game.
Teej, what do you like there?
Yeah. I don't know.
It's a tough one. It's a big one.
I mean, I was impressed
for both
with
teams.
I was impressed with Denver last week. I thought their defense played very, very good. And in the week before that, they just blew all sorts of, against the Ravens. I didn't like the Falcons last week at all either. I have, for the most part, liked them and their play this year. I think this Falcons team is a little bit better offensively, but it comes down to that defense of Denver and how they're going to stack up. At this point, I think my play on this one is going to be under. And
it's how
I don't like those, but I think I'm going
under.
Well,
but when you break it down from a defensive standpoint, Denver's D has held three of their last four opponents to under 17 points a game. Atlanta's D has held their last two opponents to under 22 points a game. The problem I have with Atlanta's pass defense is Marquez Valdez-Scantling tore them apart, and he's only been in New Orleans for a couple of weeks. So I'm looking at the progressions here of Bo Nix and what they've started. It's like Peyton's peeling a little bit more and more back of the onion. Cortland Sutton, I think, is going to have a big game here. Devon Vele, I think, is another guy who's potential to have a big game here. That's the biggest thing, is Atlanta's D is good to a certain extent. They can't cover in the passing game at all. And then when you flip to Denver's side, Denver's second in the league in sacks, and Atlanta's offensive line has given up at least 2 sacks in 5 of the last 6 games. So I think I lean a little bit to the underside here, but I actually like the Broncos to cover the number at home. I think if the game was in Atlanta, I might feel a little different, but this Broncos team is really, really starting to roll here. And we're going to get into the 2 biggest games of the weekend. We're going to start with the one I think it's actually, it's hard to say Chiefs-Bills isn't the biggest game of the weekend. It is. But this one's just as important. We just talked about the playoff picture, the Ravens and the Steelers. The Steelers 3-point underdogs at home to the Ravens. The Steelers have won 7 of the last 8 games here. And all those games have been decided by a touchdown or less. The Baltimore passing defense, I've said it time and time and time again, and I will continue to say it. How stupid did Jamar Chase make their secondary look? Like, he looked like a little kid playing Tecmo Bowl, running wherever the hell he wanted to on Thursday night. I know, Ravens fans, you ended up getting the win, but George Pickens is really starting to play good football, and he's got the timing down with Russell Wilson. They're starting to get Van Jefferson, Najee Harris, Mac. I've said this to you a bunch of times. He looks like a completely different guy right now. The disrespect here to the Steelers to have them 3-point home dogs in this game. You've got the number one offense in Baltimore, and you've got a top 3 defense in Pittsburgh. I think this game is going to be a war, and I love that it's not on at the same time as Chiefs Bills.
Absolutely. The Ravens 17-5 against the AFC North, Lamar is, but against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's 1-3. Okay. He has thrown more interceptions than touchdowns in his career against the Steelers. It's the only team that do that. I told you last week when we talked about the Steelers playing against the Commanders and kind of that they know how to play against Lamar. They're not intimidated by Lamar. And that's one of the things that when Lamar plays, and TJ, we saw it like when they played the Broncos, they're not used to playing against Lamar. The Steelers are. Now, with that being said, I've watched so many of these games between Baltimore and Pittsburgh. It always comes down to, a field goal somewhere along the line. There's a lot of field goals in this game. TJ, I know you don't like that, but it's just the way that these two teams play. Lots of field goals. It's a brutal game. Lots of big hits. The Steelers typically actually don't play really well at home against Baltimore. They actually play better in Baltimore than they do at home. With all that being said, I think this is a game that the Steelers actually are going to steal. And Mike, I think it's because of what you said. I don't think this Baltimore defense is really, really good. And the Steelers offense, we can say what we want. We can joke about Russell Wilson, but this Steelers defense has been all of a sudden pretty dynamic.
I agree with you, Mac. The Steelers defense has been fantastic. I've been very impressed with them. When I know it's only one player, but when Baltimore lost Patrick Queen, I was like, what are they doing? That's like their guy. And they just let him go for nothing to the Steelers too. It's like, what are you doing? Look, the Steelers have won 7 out of the last 8 in this series head to head. The last 7 have all gone under the number, with the highest line being at 44.5. So you know where I'm going to go on this one. But this is a different, as much as I like watching points, Mac, I love watching these games because they are just that. This is like the closest to old school football that we get anymore, is when the Ravens play the Steelers. I'm going to go under on this one. But I think the Steelers win this game as well. I think that they've got, like you said, they're not afraid to play Lamar. I like how the offense is getting better with Russ. And you kind of figured it might have been only a matter of time. That defense was always going to be great. So if the offense could find some way to put some points on the board, this team goes from a 7-win team to a 10-win team pretty quickly.
For me, it's the interesting part about this is the lack of defense by the Ravens. You look at these point totals that the Ravens have given up this year: 27, 26, 25. They had the great game against Buffalo and they shut them down right away. 38, 23, 31. They gave up 29 and lost to the freaking Browns. They had another good game against Denver, and they gave up 34 to the Bengals. Like, the Steelers are scoring points at a high clip right now, which is unusual for them. And the Ravens have shown us the same thing through 10 games, that they cannot stop the pass. Like, it was dumbfounding to me to watch a Ravens team. And Jamar Chase wasn't just like, oh, he made a great play here, he just ran away from it. He was running like Mario Kart in and out of their entire damn defense last week. And I'm like, what the hell happened to the Ravens passing defense? And I've been jumped on in the power pyramid so many times this year about disrespecting the Ravens because they have the greatest running attack in offense in the history of the NFL. It doesn't do you a damn bit of good if you can't stop anybody. And that's, I think, ultimately what ends up hurting this Ravens team. The disrespect to the Steelers I'll get to when we get to our best bets. Mac, you get the final pick on this one.
And like I said, I think this is a different Pittsburgh Steelers team. They're gonna surprise people down the stretch. I know it's a tough stretch, and it's gonna start this week. They haven't played one divisional game. We have to remember that as well. It's kind of a weird, quirky part of the schedule this late in the season where they haven't played a divisional game. They want to get off to a good start, and there's no better man to do it. I'm gonna toot his horn a little bit. Mike Tomlin's gonna have that team ready to go. Steelers are gonna win this one.
We switch to a 125 left coast kickoff where we've got CBS has this one, and I can't believe anybody tried to ask if they wanted to flex this. There was no way in hell. For the 8th time since 2020, the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. Bills about a 2.5-point favorite, over under 46. It's a CBS game, so you know we've got Tony Romo and Jim Nance on this call right here. And this is a fantastic matchup because when you break down all the numbers, you can go 7 different ways to Sunday on this damn thing. Buffalo's won 3 of the 4 in the regular season. We know what's happened in the postseason. I've been in this spot already with Kansas City this year. When they played San Francisco, they were a plus money underdog. I'm in the same spot here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Patrick Mahomes, 11-3 as a dog, 12-1-1 against the spread as a dog. The impact of DeAndre Hopkins on this offense. Oh, by the way, just to continue to scare people, Isaiah Pacheco was back at practice this week. Juju Smith-Schuster is progressing along. The Chiefs are going to add pieces and add pieces and add pieces. For Buffalo, no Keon Coleman. Status of Dalton Kincaid and Amari Cooper is going to be up in the air. This is going to be interesting because you've got the Buffalo offense that can score like crazy this year. You've got the Kansas City defense that doesn't really let you do that. TJ, I know how much you love the Kansas City Chiefs. Run with this one to start us off.
Yeah, it's just this. It's the same old Chiefs, right? And it, like Max said, is this the week? Is this the week? You know the loss is coming. Is this the week? And I don't know if this is the week. I don't think it is. The one thing about Buffalo, though, is they've had pretty good success against the Chiefs in the regular season. It's when that calendar ticks to January that they just seem to forget how to play football against this team. But they really have done well in the regular season. So I have that kind of over here, but I have the loss, the no Keon Coleman is going to be a huge deal because him and Josh have developed this great chemistry throughout the season. I think that's going to be a very big miss here for the Bills. I think I'm taking the Chiefs. I don't think the BS ends this week.
I was just looking at the remaining schedule for the Chiefs. I'm a little concerned. At Carolina, Vegas, the Chargers, at the Browns, Texans, at the Steelers, at the Broncos. Maybe they can go undefeated. I may have to retract that statement. I mean, honestly, if you really look at that, the game at Pittsburgh could be maybe, and then maybe the Texans. But other than that, I don't know. I agree with you, TJ. I don't know if this is the week. I think this is the week where Kansas City goes, you know what? Everyone's counting us out, kind of rally the troops again. I know Buffalo has had success against them, but man, I can't pick against the Chiefs. I just can't do it at this point. I just think, and Mike, you said it. This is a Bills team that, what don't they have, Mike? What don't they have?
Oh, I don't know if we got enough time for what don't they have here. It's the thing, and I'm going to give Josh Allen all the credit in the world. Last week you saw them utilize all of the weapons in the passing game. Knox and Holland, Samuel, Shakir, Ty Johnson. They did a good job with it, but you were playing the Colts. Now you're playing the Chiefs. And what do the Chiefs not let you do? The Chiefs don't let you run the ball. So Josh is going to have to throw the ball all day long. Josh Allen's legs are going to have to be the bulk of the running game. but these two are so damn familiar with each other. I don't think there's really going to be a whole lot of anything that surprises either side of it. I know a lot of people think because last week the Chiefs, they got the blocked field goal at the end of the game, and it's a trouble spot, and it kind of goes a little bit back to what you were saying, TJ. It's like Josh Allen has proved this year. He looked a little shaky against Indy with a couple of picks there, but Kansas City's going to make him throw the football. And if Josh Allen can not turn the ball over in this game, they're going to have a shot. I mean, Josh Allen is playing the best football he's played, and that's saying a lot for him. But I do think, to echo your point, TJ, the loss of Keon Coleman is massive, and it took them a while to get on the same page. But that's a big, big time loss, especially in this game. Mac?
No, 100%. This has
good old technology. Mac, go for it.
Absolutely. Here. Yeah. One of the things that I heard and I thought was quite interesting, and I don't remember who said it, but they were talking about the Chiefs, and they were saying, the Kansas City Chiefs, the whole organization knows every week they're going to win. They're ready to go offensively, defensively, special teams. They know they're well coached. They feel like they're the best coached team in the NFL. They just know that they're going to win. It doesn't matter what the situation is going to be. And here's the thing. Other teams feel that way as well. They just know, hey, it's the Chiefs. They're going to find a way to win. Maybe Buffalo's not quite there. I think Buffalo's had a little success against them. They probably know that they can handle them. But this Chiefs team to me is so well-rounded. I just think this is where Patrick steps up. He loves, this is a Mahomes kind of game. This is a Mahomes-Kelsey kind of game. They're going to rise to the top in this one.
Can they just do me a favor, though? Can they just win this game early? And so I don't have to go through is this the week feeling in my stomach, because I'm tired of that. Can they just blow them out, please? Just please, pretty please, Mahomes, just make it 35-0 at halftime. I mean, counting the ways that this team finds ways to win I'm out of hands and I'm out of toes. I can't count anymore. And I say that partially as a bitter Raider fan, but I also say it in complete awe of the fact that they're building a team that reminds me so much of the New England Patriots that it makes me sick. But they're winning games, and great teams find ways to win, whether it's a blocked field goal or a touchdown at the end or whatever it is. They find ways to win, and that's what this Chiefs team is doing.
I'm going to hold on to my pick here before our best bet segment, which we'll get started on here in just a second. We're going to give Mac the honors on that one. A couple other notable games this weekend: San Francisco and Seattle, the NFC West, kind of a cluster F right now with Arizona out in front, the lead birds, if you will. And then also Green Bay and Chicago, which is a game that a couple of weeks ago looked a lot better than it was. Chicago has repeated the process that they have for a long time here. New offensive coordinator. They're kind of a disaster. I've said my piece on this Packers team several times this year. I don't think they're as good as everybody thinks that they are. So those are a couple more of the NFL games. Let's get to our best bets before we get out of here. Mac, please don't pull out a freaking scroll like the Declaration of Independence like you did last week for your best bet. Go for it.
All right. I'm going to East Carolina. Caden Hauser, you know him, quarterback, formerly of the Michigan State Spartans. His last 3 games, Mike, TJ, 394 yards, 13 touchdowns. I read that right. 13 touchdowns. He's had 5 touchdowns in his last 2 wins. He's going up against Tulsa. Do you know what Tulsa doesn't do? They don't play defense. They are the worst. The worst. It says it right here. 134th. That's the worst in all of college football in passing. The worst team. I'm taking them. The over, TJ, 299.5 yards. The over. Tulsa, terrible.
Mac has turned in
for 300 yards against Tulsa.
Mac has turned into the college football player prop dork on this show. DJ, what do you got?
Dude, I love it. And he's right. Tulsa is the over champion, and I have a wallet slip to prove it. I'm taking BYU this weekend.
BYU.
I think they get this thing. They know what they know what they have to play for. They're at home against Kansas. That stadium at night is unreal. I love it so much. I'm taking BYU.
Strange things happen in Provo after dark. We've talked about that several times. I'm going to stick to the National Football League for my best bets of the weekend. Alluded on a couple of them. I think the spot for the Steelers against one of the worst Ravens defenses that I've ever seen in my life. I like the Steelers on the money line. You're going to give me plus money on Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. I've already said this once this year. I'm not going to turn that down. And because I like things in threes, the Detroit Lions are red hot right now, and they played a really, really crappy game on Sunday Night Football. They were able to escape with a win. Jacksonville has no Waffle House Jesus to steal one of Tony's lines, so Mac Jones gets the start at Ford Field. This is a monster number. I don't play parlays a ton, but when I do them, we're going to make them big. I got the Chiefs money line, the Steelers money line, and the Lions to cover 13.5 at home. That's a plus 908. So do what you want with that. I just, again, the disrespect factor to Pittsburgh, I think, in this spot. Yeah, I know how good Baltimore's offense is, but don't think we're giving anybody the credit for how good Pittsburgh's defense is and how bad Baltimore's defense is against Pittsburgh's offense. And I'm going to be honest, coming off of the performance from the Lions last Sunday night, Jared Goff, I know is going to want to have a big game. That Lions offense for the first time looked out of sync, and they're the Lions, and they got it done. So, yeah, it's a big number. Do I like covering big numbers? Only when Mac Jones is playing quarterback. So, again, that's a plus 908 there, fellas. That's a good one. TJ, final word.
Jones. Who is Mac Jones?
I'd rather have Vegas Mac at quarterback.
That's what I order when I go to McDonald's. A Mac Jones.
Mac Jones.
Look, I think that's a great pick, Mike. Just because I think Detroit's kind of upset with the way they played on Sunday night. They're a lot better. They found a way to win as good teams do. But this is a game that should be a cakewalk for them. So that number is pretty big. But I like Goff coming out quick in this one, and I think they're going to get up big, and I think it's going to be quick.
Those were the three games that I really liked this weekend, and I thought about waiting a little bit closer to Sunday's kickoff for that Lions game. Maybe it come down a little bit, but as you guys know, and TJ, you and I have had this conversation very many times. It also could have worked in the reverse factor. The other thing is I wanted the higher plus value on the Chiefs and the Steelers. So we've had this conversation several times. You like a line, lock that line in when you like it. Don't wait for it. Don't get greedy on it because it can't. I mean, it wouldn't shock me by the time kickoff starts if that thing in the Detroit game goes up to 14.5. Mac, final word.
Well, college football this week, not a whole lot out there for us to enjoy. Maybe this is the week we get a surprise, Mercer Bears. Maybe. We'll see.
I don't even know how I can follow that. We'll be back next Friday on these very channels. TJ After Dark will have his breakdown of Tennessee and Georgia, the biggest game on the slate in the college schedule. A lot of stuff coming up. We've got a new segment next week. We've got a little hockey face-off that'll come out every Wednesday. I lost to Mac in our golf competition this year, so I have to sit on the sideline for this one. So TJ and Vegas Mac every Wednesday are going head-to-head on some hockey picks, appropriate because they're both a couple of puckheads. For TJ, for Vegas Mac, follow us at Mike Arana Show on all the social channels except for Snapchat. We'll talk to you next Friday.